Hello, my name is Rufus Reid, and I'm here to talk to you about me. Um, I'm very honored to be asked to uh, talk about myself and how I got things started. Uh, I've been doing it for a long time. I'm a double bassist. I started on electric bass. Actually, I started on trumpet long time ago. I was 17. I was in high school and I was about to graduate. And my mother says, you should go out and, you know, take your classes to go. I was raised in Sacramento, California. So I was going to go to Sacramento State College. So I was going to get in line and sign up for all my classes and all that stuff. and, but prior to that, I had found out about the Air Force was going to hold auditions, and if you pass the auditions, uh, you were automatically in the band. Now, the reason I'm talking about this because I was going to get drafted, and that was real. So when I got out to the college, I guess I was three people from the desk to sign up, and I just bolted and went to the Air Force recruiter's office, which I kind of figured out where it was anyway. Um, and I took the audition, passed it by the skin of my teeth, but I did pass. I was a trumpet player, you see, and I wasn't a very good trumpet player, as I remember, but I had skills. I could read, and at that particular period in the mid 60s, the music education in California was actually pretty fantastic. Um, and I had two band directors that were fantastic. And as I got older and graduated and all this, I really realized that they really taught us a lot of things. And so I passed, and I passed the audition, and I had to go home, right? And so my mother says, "Hey, you're back already." I said, "What classes did you take?" And then, of course, I said, "Well," I fessed up and said, "Well, uh, I didn't sign up. I actually went and auditioned for the Air Force." And she was not happy about that. But I said, I passed the audition, and I said, now I don't have to think about carrying a rifle. I can carry my trumpet. And from that point on, she was cool. And, most people have not such great memories of being in the military, but for me, it basically changed my whole life. And I was in Montgomery, Alabama, was my first assignment. Uh, and That was an amazing period for me. Uh, I actually ended up being a better trumpet player, but that's where I began to teach myself the bass. And Montgomery, Alabama at that time was obviously segregated, and but it was very volatile in that they had the bombings in Birmingham. I was there when Kennedy got assassinated, and so there was a lot of stuff going on. But that's where I saw Ike Tina Turner live up front. It was amazing, and I saw Bobby Blue Bland's band. I saw James Brown's band. James Brown was beating up drummers then. Um, and I realized the music was powerful. And I began to teach myself the bass. I had a Bob Haggard bass book. It just had showed, a little picture on the top, and it said this is a E flat with that finger and all this. And, and I took took an audition at a club in Montgomery, and there was a gentleman by the name of Al Stringer, who was an organist and saxophone player, but he was in the military. He was in the army with Cannonball Adderley, and boy, he could really play. And he hired me, believe it or not. And I didn't even have an electric bass because I wasn't strong enough to even begin to play a double bass. But and there was no amplifier or any of those kind of things. But my training was in Montgomery, Alabama. We had to learn music off the jukebox so that we could play it on the weekend. So nobody told me. I mean, that's what we talk about transcriptions nowadays. But we would listen, and then we would retain it and play it on the weekend and every week. So for over a year and a half, I was doing that. Plus, I was playing in the military band, um, playing still trumpet because that was my job. And in Montgomery, I was one of the two or three uh, persons of color in the band, and everybody was happy that I was in. We were in the band because a mandate had come down. If we had to do a parade in the city, if everybody can't go, nobody goes. And so everybody loved us, because nobody wanted to do the parades anyway. But it was amazing because I also used to play taps at 6 o'clock in the morning out in the fields of Alabama for the World War II or Korean War veterans, black veterans that were being honored and buried, and I had to play taps. So I have all those memories of Montgomery, Alabama, being an amazing growth for me as a player and as a young man. Um, so that was amazing. So that's how I kind of got started. And as we go, eventually I got shipped to Japan, and I'm playing the bass lot more. And in Japan, that's when I saw a lot of the great jazz musicians live and up front. That's when I saw Duke Ellington live. That's Cannonball Adderley, the Modern Jazz Quartet. Um, oh man, Charlie Persip, Philly Joe, Blue Mitchell. It was an amazing time for me, and I would buy records a lot. And actually, one of the questions was what was the first first jazz record that I paid with my own money? My brother gave me my first album because I was a trumpet player, so um, he gave me a Miles Davis uh, walking, with the stoplight on the cover, and J.J. Johnson and Lucky Thompson and Horace, Percy Heath, Klug, Kenny Clark, and wow, I could sing all those, but he gave me that one. So I guess the next one I would buy. Uh, this was when I was still in high school. Um, I didn't really buy any records honestly until I got into the military, and then I began to because at the PX, you could buy all these records. And my studying the bass, if it had a bass on the cover, I probably bought it. Um, because that's what really interested me at the time. And I think I remember buying a Charlie Mingus record because it had the bass on the cover, and but I didn't like it. I said some of it was okay, and then I said, well, why did he do that? So it took me a while to grow into that. Um, but in Japan is when I really got crazy with the recordings and started buying a lot of Ray Brown, uh, Eddie Harris with Ron Carter, and Pablo Records was very prominent at that time, and the poll winners with Shelly Man and Ray Brown and Barney Kessel and all that. Oh man, it was amazing, and that's when I also fell in love with Eddie Harris. Um, Freedom Jazz Dance with Ron Carter and Billy Higgins, and Cedar Walton, Ray Carterton on trumpet, who I never really heard much after that, but I played those records to death. The Three Sounds, I fell in love with those as well. Um, but Japan was a fantastic time for me, and that's when I started taking some lessons with a retired Japanese orchestra musician, and I couldn't speak that much. I couldn't speak any Japanese, and he couldn't speak any English. But we figured it out, and he let me know when it wasn't happening and all that kind of stuff. So I began to really get involved more and more and more and more. And then when I left Japan, I had a lot of information, but I knew I wanted to. Well, actually, when I saw Ray Brown and Oscar Peterson trio in Japan, that's what I want to do. And little did I know what that would entail, but that's what I wanted to do. And I actually met Ray Brown in Japan, and he was so nice to me, and it was an amazing experience. Then that's why I saw Sam Jones, who replaced Ray, and Lewis Hayes was playing with Oscar Peterson, and I saw that, and it was a total different thing, and and Sam was also very kind to me when I first met him, and hey, I'm rolling, but I have no idea what I'm really doing, um, except that I loved it, and I knew I needed a teacher. So I that was because I was 17 because my mother had to sign for me to go into the Air Force. Um, so I didn't go to college right away until I got out of the military, and then I went back, and I was up in Bremerton, Washington. Prior to that, I was went back to Sacramento and thought I'd stay there for a little while. Um, and I had a most wonderful experience there before I went to Seattle, uh, where I had the opportunity to play with Buddy Montgomery. This was Wes Montgomery's brother, and Monk Montgomery was the bassist who was supposed to have played with Buddy on this gig in Sacramento. And I had been playing these little jam sessions and things, but I didn't even know how he knew my name, But I was playing jam sessions at this club where they would bring in Wes and a lot of people at that time. And so Buddy Montgomery called me, and I said, yes, of course. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And Eddie Moore was playing drums. And we did 2 weeks, 6 nights at this place uh, in in Sacramento, California. And Buddy didn't read music, didn't have any music, so I had to learn everything literally. So my ears just began to do this, and I didn't have a choice. But it was so much fun, and he was a good teacher. I mean, he taught me the tunes, and it was up to me to keep them, retain them in some manner. And when the gig was over, he was very kind. He said, "You did a good job, man. Keep it up. Hope we see each other again someday." And it was probably a good 5 years uh, before I actually got to see him again. Um, I left Sacramento and went to Seattle, Washington. My brother was living on Mercer Island and allowed me to come and stay with him, um, to kind of get my act together. He and his wife and 2 children. Uh, he let me have the house to myself because they worked. The kids went to school, and all I did was practice and go to jam sessions. He let me have his car at night because he was home. It was amazing. So I'm uh, Seattle was an amazing place at that time, and my first teacher in Seattle was his name was James Harnett. He was in this principal bass of the Seattle Symphony, and he taught me a lot. I had never even known that bass could be played like that before, but he prepared me. Um, I was in Seattle for 2.5 years or so, and that's where I met my wife, and uh, I got accepted to Northwestern, and so the following, it was time to leave Seattle, and I began to. We drove down. I had a little gig in the summertime, just in Texas, and no, New Mexico, Albuquerque, and so. Uh, my wife, we weren't married at that time, so we had a good run, and so she says, "Well, okay, we'll part." And so she went home, and I went to Albuquerque, played the little gig, and then went to Chicago to go to school. Um, Warren Benfield was the bass teacher at Northwestern. He was also in this Chicago Symphony, and that's all I wanted. And then Chicago, because that's where Eddie Harris is from. And I said, wow, because I loved the Eddie Harris recordings. And so I met him. And this was kind of uh, getting into a little bit about people who were uh, important in my life. And Eddie Harris was certainly one of those, for sure. Um, when I saw him, I said, "Man, I really love your music. I just got out of service. I'm here in school now, and I'd love to play with you at some time." And he says, "Well, you're in school right now, right?" I said, "Yes." He says, "No, you go finish school. All this stuff will be out here. Go and get your education. And if when you're ready and you've graduated and got everything, come and talk to me again." And so I was kind of distraught a little bit, but I realized he was really honest, and I have never met anyone quite like he since. He taught us a lot. When I did get a chance to play with him, and one of the questions that I've been asked to talk about is some advice that I had received some from important people in my life, older musicians. Actually, I had a lot of older musicians who were very candid with me and very upfront with me. But Eddie Harris was one of the first ones. It was my first boss, professional musician, and he he says, all I want you to guys to do is to be on time and be able to play. Um, and so that was simple enough to me. Um, but it was at that time it was difficult for certain people to 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 go there. Be able to play all the time. Um, and Eddie taught us a lot about going into the studio. He was very methodical, and it was a pretty amazing period with him. And he he taught us that the contracts that he had with the he was on Atlantic Records at that time, and he told us, he said, they don't want me to use you guys, his band. They want me to use the hit makers, like Bernard Purdy and Chuck Rainey. They had just made a hit with Aretha Franklin at the time, and who was also on Atlantic Records. And he said, "Well, they don't want me to use you, but I'm fighting for you now. But don't mess up because I have to pull you out the mix." And I didn't want him to do that, so he was basically telling us to really, you know, keep our stuff up as sharp as we possibly can to do it. And and I've been playing well over 50 years now, and I haven't really met anybody who was so the integrity that he in, showed was fantastic, and um, I learned musically from him, but aesthetically, how to run my life and treat other musicians that way. And so I used to do these workshops. I had done this first workshop with Jamie Abersold. Some of you may know that name. Educationally, he's got all these recordings just for people to learn how to play this music. So I did this workshop with him, and it was in North Dakota. It was so cold, but I had about 25 little bass players, and they didn't know anything. And I had Ray Brown's book, but it was difficult for me to get into that book. I mean, really. And so I ended up having to write little things for them. And so I was driving in the car with Eddie Harris. We were driving, and I was saying, "Yeah, man, Ray Brown doesn't even know it, man. I just sold 25 of his books for him." And Eddie said, "Well, why don't you write your own book?" I said, "What?" Uh, he says, "You're intelligent." I said, "Yes." "You college graduate?" "Yes." "You're playing with me on Atlantic Records?" "Yes." "Write your own book." He said, "But you must do two things. You have to finish it first, and then you own it." And at that time, I had no idea how profound those two statements were. And I still own it to this day. Um, but Eddie Harris taught me about being a total musician, being able to teach. But what if you write something, you own it. He did that. He was an example, and it was an amazing thing. And one of the one of the really important things he says, Don't ever play with anybody or stand for anybody to treat you less than a human being. And if you travel somewhere and something goes wrong, always keep $100. He says, I know $100 is a lot of money, but especially back then and now, but back then it was really easy. But if you can get $100, you put it, just hide it in your wallet somewhere. So if something goes down that's not right, you can always get your butt home. And that advice has stayed with me in terms of how to treat other musicians who I work with and come in contact with. Let me see, I'm looking at over here at the boy. I'm looking at the chat here. Um, so it says, what am I doing as my current projects? Right now, I'm in the middle of. I've been given two commissions. One's to write for a string quartet. Yeah, wow, and that's got me busy and but very exciting. And Also, Juilliard uh, called me and wanted me to put together some etudes for their preparatory high school kids coming into Juilliard because it's a music apprenticeship program, and they got a grant. Um, it was very interesting because they're reaching out to persons of uh, children or young players of color, and because they were approached by uh, one of these precocious guys said something to he says, well, why do we always have to play these dead people's music, these etudes, these dead people? And so they got a grant to be able to, and they approached me and some other composers to write some etudes for them so they can show them that there are some composers of color who are still alive. And so I'm in the throes of that now. And it sounds like it would be an easy task, but it really isn't. I'm trying to write something that would be kind of fun for them to play and still learn something in the early stages of their uh, careers. So just those two are keeping me busy for sure. Let me see. Um, uh, Says, how did I deal through the pandemic? Well, I think I've done as well as people who have something to do, to think about. I think we as creative people, those of us who are creative, whether musicians or writers, authors, poets, etc., um, you have something to think about, to occupy your mind. And so I had some projects that actually kept me, that I was always complaining. I never had enough time to really devote to them like I wanted to. And then I couldn't use that excuse anymore. And so I actually revisited some big band charts that I had written that needed some revisiting. So in the early stages, I was really busy doing that, and so I completed a couple that I'm fairly pleased about, and it takes up the time. But of course, there's always something to do at home. And fortunately for me, with my wife, we had each other, and we we still like each other, and so it's actually been okay. Um, the worst part is um, chops are almost went away, you know. So, but I would practice trying to keep something happening. But those of you who are players, you know, practice is one thing, but playing um, is a totally different thing and requires a lot more. And of course, I was busy prior to the pandemic, and quote unquote chops were up, but that changed. So, but I am practicing more now. Things are beginning to open up a little bit. Um, so it's a never ending process to practice and everything. But I can practice and then I can sit down and write something and then I can read something and try to listen to music. I've been with the the string quartet commission. I've been listening to a lot of string quartet music, which is a lot of to get inspired by and depressed about. Um, but for me, the composing is the process that I love more than anything. Um, for some reason, my music is resonating with people because composition really came late to me. Um, I've always been intrigued about, and I've had the luxury and the good fortune to play with some of the great composers of our time: Benny Golson, Bob Brookmeyer, Thad Jones, um, Jimmy Heath, Slide Hampton. Uh, um, I have played with him a little bit, but he's one of my heroes, Wayne Shorter, and he's still throwing it down. So it's a very a process that I dearly love. And I got involved with the BMI Composers Workshop, and my good friend Jim McNeely, who's, as far as I'm concerned, he's a good friend, but he's one of my composition gurus. Um, and so that time when I stopped teaching at William Patterson University, I joined the BMI Composers Workshop, and then that whole thing just kind of exploded for me. Um, Let me see. Okay. Any advice you want to give to the younger musicians to keep them encouraged? Hmm. Well, I have to tell you, everyone has encouraged me by just a pat on the back or saying, "Yeah, man, I hear you." And it coming from the right person, it could empower you for years. Um, Initially, I want the young people, if you have a passion and you have the love of becoming a player, don't lose that dream. I had no idea I was going to be who I've become. I'm here, Rufus Reid, talking about my life now, but I had no idea, nor I hadn't even thought about it. Don't lose it, you know. And so it was amazing for me to talk to someone, keep following your path. The thing is, if you uh, what did I write down here? You know, being realistic at a point, you have to really understand that, you know, if you're talking to a high school person or younger, a lot of things haven't unfolded yet about your life. But if you're really moving on, um, uh, really be realistic to yourself about whether or not you really have it. And it's like, you know when you're playing well. And you really don't have to have anybody telling you that you're playing well. It's nice to hear, for sure. But if you're not playing well, you definitely don't want to hear somebody say, man, you're not really playing well, because you know it more than anybody that you haven't prepared. And it's the preparation, I think, that will get you uh, into places that you didn't even know you could go. And I always tell players, don't hold back. You never know who's listening to you, ever. It could be a rehearsal or a know nothing, quote unquote, rehearsal, but somebody's hearing you and remembering. Uh, I tell people I got the chance to play with J.J. Johnson, and when he was finally came back after being in California and not playing for a long time, and he got another, needed a band, and they had a piano player. He knew Cedar Walton, and I think he had Victor Lewis playing drums. And he says, I want the bass player I practiced with on this Jamie Aebersold play along records. I played with him every day. He didn't even know my name. And then he had to go get the album, and he looked and he said, yeah, Rufus Reid. And his manager at that time, she said, I know him and I'll get him. That's how I got that gig, and I kept it. So you never know who's listening to you. And I learned from Slide Hampton on rehearsal, when he would play a rehearsal, man, it was amazing. The rehearsal was supposed to let you know how the gig's supposed to happen. And he it was always amazing to me. And so the rehearsals sometimes were even more demanding than the gig itself. But so I've had encouragement from those people. So don't hold back, and just keep that going on, and you'll be amazed. If you really want to learn more about me, go to rufusreid.com, and you can email me at rufusreid.com if you'd like to speak to me earlier. But and if you have anything you would like to talk about, I have difficulty looking at the chat and responding, but it's it's really been a pleasure to me. I have more passion now about music than I did when I was just getting started, and I wish that upon you. So thank you very much for listening. I talked a lot. I hope you learned something about Rufus Reid. Thank you. Take care.